Good evening and welcome to our community gathering. My name is Curtis Reed and I'm the Executive Director of Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity. I am working at about 40% capacity because my bronchial tubes are constricted. So if you hear a halting voice, Mary will pick up the slack. So the first thing what I'd like to do is have everyone go to the chat that's on the Zoom call. If you're on the Zoom call, go to the chat and you will see that there are two ways to log into our short poll. If you're doing it off of the web, then it's pollev.com/cread552. Or from your phone, it would be cread552 and text that to 22333.
Wait. This is in addition to the text I already sent?
We're going to actually start that text over again. So let me pull up the screen that we need to share.
I'm sorry, I'm really confused.
I'm getting the same question over and over and over again.
I'm not getting any questions.
So I got the poll.
I didn't.
Little poll. Okay.
Yeah, I went to that. I texted what you told us to, and I actually got the poll put up.
Okay.
So I have it.
Great.
So if you text that,
Oh,
you'll get a text
wait,
back.
is it a link you have to click?
Yeah, it'll be right within the text. They shoot you back a text. It's right within that link.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay. Got it?
Asking what we had for breakfast? Yeah.
Yes. Hold on. Let me pull up the.
Oh my God, I've been asked that question 4 times now, what I had for breakfast.
About the cookie policy, right?
Yeah, it's the cookie
What?
poll.
Oh, I see.
What?
Oh,
Oh, man.
I'm trying to get
Well, I
to.
had to go on, I went on my phone through the web. I went outside of this. That's how I got the questionnaire.
All right. When it says I'm a participator, it wants me to give my username.
It shouldn't. You shouldn't have to put a username in.
Well, is this poll everywhere? Am I on the right thing here?
You put in his username, the Creed.
Oh, you put in his username.
Yes.
The Creed 552 or just
Yes.
Yes,
okay, thanks.
that's correct.
Sorry, this is
It's not going beyond the breakfast.
Right. Because I haven't. So does everyone have the first question up?
No, and I keep asking it again and again.
They keep asking.
Okay.
The breakfast question.
All right. So we're gonna go to the next question.
Okay.
So where do you live?
It doesn't,
it's not moving to the next question.
yeah.
Next question.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
I just got it. Okay. Okay.
I got it now.
Yeah, there might be a little pause. Might be a little bit of a pause, so we just need to be patient.
Okay. I'm just gonna go back for a second to look at what people had for breakfast this morning.
And it says
Almond milk,
here
yogurt,
that response-
Coffee.
coffee. A lot of people had oatmeal. Okay.
Are you supposed to hit clear last response
No.
after you hit Bennington?
Okay.
Ah, there we go.
So how long have you lived?
But I'm answering the question.
So it looks like 2/3 I've been in Bennington for 11 years or more. Okay.
Yep, I see you're directing us to the next.
Yes, I'm directing to the next question.
Okay.
Did it pop up?
Yep.
3 words, you must be kidding me. I'm sorry,
You want
3 words.
to distill it?
Oh,
It doesn't have to be, Mary, it doesn't have to be a complete sentence either.
no, it's 3 words.
Yeah, but even so, I mean, all right. Okay, I'll do this.
Just making it difficult for you all. Here we go.
So can you see the screen?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. It's good for.
Yes, I am. Right now, they're asking us questions.
I can hear. I just can't participate.
So that's okay. What kind of question is?
Well, they're opening up to see how diversified this group is. How long have you lived in the town? So,
I don't watch this on TV. It's not available.
yes,
Yes.
yes, but we can't on TV participate.
What am I looking at? Are these words that other people have put in?
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
like a word cloud. Word clouds. Everybody who's responding.
Oh, I see what's going on there. Yeah, I guess
This is what the-
when I put it on.
Because I don't see one of mine on there.
Yes, Cat TV is here. They have new channel 1085.
So they're opening this to the public for questionnaires.
So, which is pretty scary because I just want to emphasize what you're saying. As we know, this is still the first wave. And I think a lot of people just wait and let them.
Catherine, you may want to mute your. Catherine, we can hear you if you want to be muted.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Just so you understand, you can.
Did everyone put the
also
words in? Hmm?
I just
No.
want to let folks know, there's some questions in the chat. My understanding is that you can watch it off of the local cable, right? But
Right.
it might be harder, but you need to get back onto this platform if you have questions during the Q&A. Am I right, Curtis, about that?
Right. That's correct. Okay. We're going to move along.
Okay, my answer still isn't there, but whatever. Okay. Bennington's board.
Select board question, is that up?
Yeah, then what about the select board?
Okay.
Yeah, the question's up. Just curious why some folks' responses aren't coming up in the word cloud. So
Yeah, me too.
Hmm.
I don't know why. Hey, Mary, you can always put them in the chat. You can put them in the chat.
Okay, I mean, it doesn't really matter. I just, like, they're different than the other ones. So, all right, I will. To everyone.
Mhm.
Need to be anonymous.
There.
I must say that there's no way that we could know who's saying what.
Okay.
No, I'm not worried about that. I was just that mine weren't. I put them in the chat.
Okay,
Okay.
cool. That's cool.
Right. Any more? Everyone
I'm
texting?
good.
You good?
Yeah, great.
All right.
Folks, see the next one?
Yes, I
Yep.
see the next question about the police department.
Great.
Well, this is a good one.
Mm. Hey Curtis, we're able to save these, correct?
Yes.
We can go back to these. Okay, great.
Okay. Are there more responses coming in?
Yes, my responses are coming in.
Okay.
Anyone else seeing any missing responses?
No, mine are in this one.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay. Let's see here. All right. We'll go to the next question. So have you read the IACP report?
I'm not seeing the next question
Yeah,
yet
it
on my
didn't come
phone.
on my screen yet.
How about now?
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Good. It's impressive. Excellent.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then this is the final question. Is it up?
Yeah, it's a little blank. In 2 words, describe how you want the world to know Bennington.
Mm-hmm.
From messages. It says e-messages.
2 words. Oh.
If you all got more than one, if you all got more than 2, that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I have no way of knowing if you.
Yeah, right.
right, I'm looking at some of these. Was this to how we would want the world to see Bennington in the future, or how we want them to see it right now? I just realized I might have answered wrong here.
No, in the future.
Okay, then I've answered right. Okay.
Hmm. Oh, whose dog is that?
Mine.
Not
One
much.
of three. I'll mute.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to save these, and we're going to archive these if I can figure out how to do that later, but not right now. Okay. Well, thank you for allowing us to get to know you somewhat. I mean, it's sort of Zoom is it's really impersonal medium, I think, to deal with. And some of us have been on Zoom meetings constantly for the last 3 months. And so this gives us a sense of sort of who's in the room, what you're thinking. I thank you for indulging us with your thoughts. Now, bingo. Okay. So what are the burning questions you would like us to answer tonight? We're going to do introductions from our partnership, myself and Mary, and then we're going to talk about sort of what our vision is for launching this work. And again, I apologize for being at only 40%. So what's
Actually, Curtis, I was thinking what might be good is if folks want to put their questions also in the chat and just sort of given our platform. I'm also, I would say, not an experienced Zoomer, but if folks want to raise their hand and just speak it up, but we could also put it in the chat and we can track those.
If I might, I would prefer that we not type out the question in the chat because it depends a lot, like the wording of my questions depend a lot on maybe the question that's answered before it, and so I would have to change the chat. So maybe we could just do like a stack of who wants to ask a question and put that in the chat, put our name in the chat. Does that work, do you think?
And I'm not sure, Curtis, I think our intention on this piece of the agenda is to hear what the questions are, and then we will try to answer them throughout the presentation. I don't think we're going to answer them as they're being asked.
correct?
Curtis?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, my name's Robert Ebert. I live in Bennington. I'll ask a question. When do you think, and Sarah may answer this as well, when do you think the select board will establish some kind of citizens police commission, citizens oversight board, and what kind of priority do you think the select board is giving to that element of all of this?
Okay. All right. Another question?
Right. I'll go ahead and ask my questions then, if that's how we're doing it. So I had a couple of questions. One is that I noted that in the proposal, the word collaboration is not used once. And although it talks about input from the community, or I've forgotten the word that you use, it's similar to input. It's a different definition than the word collaboration. That's one. Two is that in terms of how we're going to get all of this, whatever is going to happen, out to the community, because it feels like everything needs to be totally transparent, since one of the major problems in this community has been lack of transparency. So how are we going to get that out? Will there be a Facebook page that anybody can post on? I think going to the town website or looking at a PowerPoint is limiting. For there are a lot of people who are economically marginalized in this community, and they may not have the means to participate other than on their phone. They can usually get Facebook. So there's that question. And then the other question I had was relative to developing policy and the people. And I understand your proposal has the 3 teams of people for researchers and all that. But the select board was talking about a policy committee. And I just wanted to note that although it's great to look at other places' policies and glean from those, you cannot, having worked on policies in various capacities, I can tell you that what I think might be a wonderful policy that worked great in Detroit for us would have absolutely no application here in Bennington. And the only way that we're going to know whether the policy being discussed actually helps the people who are suffering from the lack of that policy is by having their voices heard about it. So those are my questions.
Great questions. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I have a question, if I may.
Sure.
Yes, Vicki.
Thanks. So something I've been thinking about a lot, and just because I know how I feel myself, when I look and see the words professional attached to the folks who are going to be on these 2 boards or oversight committee, the 2 sets of 3, that's really intimidating for people to see, first of all. Second question really is how are you or the select board going to reach out to marginalized folks, Black people, poor people, disabled people? Because they're the ones who should really be part of this oversight committee.
The oversight committee or the research teams?
Sorry, oversight committee is what I'm thinking of. I apologize for that confusion.
Okay, that's all right.
Vicki, this is Mary. Can you say the first? I'm sorry. I'm trying to I'm recording and I want to make sure I capture it. Can you tell me your first question again?
Yeah. Now you're asking me to remember something, right?
This is about
Professional.
Right. What the use of the word professional in this like the IACP report. When I say the word professional, that knocks me out because I'm not a professional.
Got it.
So I think that's going to be intimidating to people.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry to talk again, but guarantee of safety, this relates to what Vicki was saying, because as you know, when the IACP were here and they had public hearings, there were 3 or 4 people at a public hearing. When they came to a meeting that we specifically set up and it was by invitation only, we had 50 some people there to tell stories. And that was because they were afraid to tell them in public because of retaliation. So I just want to flag that.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. I guess I'll frame it. My hope was that this process would be really collaborative, because I feel like that's, as a community, the best way we're going to be able to put something together and move forward. So I'm a little bit confused why the research group, which to me is, they have a really important focus in terms of kind of getting the foundation, the information that a lot of this is going to be based on, is only community members. And wondering why there aren't select board people and police also part of that, given that their questions and the things they'll be looking for in those conversations may be different than community members. And I feel like having everyone's voice at the table from the get-go is so crucial for this process.
Mhm. The next question. Any more questions? Can you hear me?
Yeah, this is Lynn Mazza. I have a question about the trainings that the select board and some people in the police department, those trainings that they were going to receive. I was wondering about how the public can get access to those. Or, I mean, I understand that we can't really like immediately participate, but I personally feel like I need those trainings. And I'm wondering, is there a way that the public can be involved in this learning process, maybe with breakout groups? I don't know how that could look, but I'm hoping that that's a piece of your plan.
Okay.
I would like to ask if there is going to be a list of qualifications for people to serve on the committee, to the oversight committee. What would the whoever's going to appoint them, what qualifications would they be looking for?
Mhm.
I mean, I think it should be a balanced committee that will have people with concerns represented there. And I haven't seen, very much about what's actually going to happen, when the committee's going to be formed, who will be considered to be on it.
Mhm. You're talking about
Police oversight.
the initial research teams, or the oversight?
The oversight committee itself.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, Curtis, just so you know, this, I know you're navigating other pieces of the platform. So on the chat, there's several questions about the process for the oversight committee, application, how do you apply, et cetera. So those are certainly, just so you all know, those are certainly pieces of this process that we're acutely aware of and want to be really thoughtful in how we are crafting that process, because we don't want to deter or create more challenges.
Mhm.
So, and we'll talk more about that, but it's helpful to know that you folks are thinking about that.
Right.
So, hi, Mr. Reed. I'm Liz Filsco. I'm someone who put 2 questions in the chat, so thank you for that, Mary. Very specifically, my questions are, will people of color, underrepresented, and historically marginalized persons be prioritized for the Citizens Oversight Team and the Community Policing Team? That's one question. And then my second question is, okay, so I'm a former public school teacher, so I think in terms of SMART goals, right? And they've really been laid out for us by the IACP, with the exception of who determines the timeline, what is the timeline, and who is going to ensure that, that we're meeting appropriate benchmarks, that we're, again, I speak in teacher terms, that we're showing proficiency, that we're demonstrating proficiency, and that we're doing so in a time-bound way.
Yeah. Great.
Okay.
Yeah. Good questions. Great questions, Liz.
I'm Al Bashevkin, and I apologize because I'm just kind of starting with this process, or just this is my first time. And if it's possible, Curtis or someone to give us an overview of how we I know how we got here, but what we're planning, how this is going to unfold. I hear a lot about different committees being formed, and I didn't know that was. I'm just not familiar with how this is unfolding. So if we could have an overview, that would be helpful to me and perhaps to some others.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. That might be a good segue for us, unless there are any other questions, segue for us into talking about who we are, what we do,
And let's
and then the plan. So Mary?
Okay.
You're on.
Can I start, Curtis?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. And you need to give your voice a break. So, hi everyone, Mary Gannon. I'll be speaking of transparency. I live over in Winchester, New Hampshire, so I'm like right across the border. But a lot of my work professionally and just as a community activist, community organizer, and my consultancies and trainings are in Vermont. But we're starting to do some good work over here in New Hampshire as well, given the current moment that we're in. So I just want to first thank everyone for spending some time with us tonight. Part of why we kind of flipped our agenda a little bit, instead of starting with introductions, was we really wanted to give voice to what you're all thinking about. We know this is a project that's a long time coming. I have been in some different ways following Bennington in my professional work, but also my community organizing in Brattleboro, and I'll talk about that in a moment.
So I like it like this. I like to see
My work is, can folks hear me? Folks hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So just quickly, just a little bit about me. Curtis and I have been working together since around 2003. I kind of do everything based on when my kid was born. And I've been involved with Vermont Partnership, formerly the Alana Community Organization, for about that amount of time. I also run a lot of my own consultancies, trainings, teaching. I like to joke that I'm somebody with a doctorate in education who couldn't find a full-time job. So I'm always trying to, figure out ways of dialing into community organizing in this work. And there's been really no lack of that. So I've been very grateful and fortunate. I have worked directly with Kaya Morris, who I know is in some ways a hometown gal. And so have, in many ways spent time talking with her about some of the challenges that the community of Bennington has faced. But, a lot of my work has been working in communities across the state of Vermont. Curtis and I have done a lot of work with the city of Burlington, with a strategic plan, looking at municipality work related to social justice and racial justice, law enforcement, working with sheriff's departments, working with school districts. I will say recently for me, what's become a real passion and interest is really supporting communities, the kinds of work that Bennington is looking at right now. So, this is what's exciting about Vermont in a lot of ways, is that this is happening across the state. Stowe is looking at this work. Rutland, as we well know, certainly with Tabitha Moore up there with the NAACP. Brattleboro's been, of course, engaging in this for a long time. We have a group in Brattleboro called the Community Equity Collaborative, which is it's a strong group of engaged stakeholders who really care about issues of justice and have been working with the town, the school district, the police department, healthcare agencies around racial and other kinds of social justice disparities for a long time. Also, just so folks know, a lot of the work that I do with Vermont Partnership is on the training and curriculum end. I spend a lot of time thinking about training design, how to bring communities together to do this kind of work, and sort of coaching and conversations. And but I'm happy to be here tonight and really excited that we're at this moment with Bennington. I'll stop there.
All right. It'll take me 60% longer to say what I need to say.
Curtis, can I say one more thing? Say one more thing? Yeah. I just want to do a shout out to Rights and Democracy. So I don't know if folks who are Rights and Democracy folks know, but I was just recently, I think, my nomination to the Rights and Democracy Institute Board was approved. I think, Mary.
It was unanimously.
Yeah, so I'm delighted about that connection. That's really, for me right now, that's like where my heart is. So it'll be interesting for for me and for us to think about how we're navigating some of those different connections and networks. But I'm really excited. I've been doing a lot of work with Heather Stockwell over here in New Hampshire. So
Great. So, so one of the things that drew me to this, to Bennington in this particular work, is that the IACP report, in all of its professional language, did not have a collaborative, there was not a collaborative voice in terms of community members. And so the process that we're laying out is really about how do we get maximum engagement with local residents, those that are vulnerable and those that are marginalized. I can say that in terms of facility review boards, in terms of policies, vision and mission for the police department, in many ways, they started off by saying that they had those things done, but they don't until the community weighs in. We have a
This guy's terrible.
Hmm?
Yeah.
Yes. I'm trying to relax. So one of the ways in which we are. One of the ways
You're
that
doing fine. You're doing fine. Just take your.
Okay, I will take my time.
Take some slow, deep breaths.
Yes. There is value in knowing how folks with respiratory disease managed. And I'm having a lesson in how to manage a body that is temporarily abled.
Do you have an inhaler to take, Curtis?
No, I see the doctor tomorrow.
Okay.
But what I wanted to convey is every step along the way, we want to engage community. For example, for the two research teams. Well, actually, let me back up. The reason that they're research teams is that oftentimes when community members go in to negotiate with the town or police department, they're at a disadvantage because they haven't studied the most promising practices that are out there. They haven't sort of researched what's happening in other places. And so that's why we wanted to have two teams of local residents look at community policing and to look at civilian review boards. Now, civilian review boards, that's a moving target because there's legislation in Montpelier that may, in fact, standardize or provide uniform policies and procedures for regional boards, not local boards, but countywide board. So Bennington or Southern Vermont might have its own civilian review board. And that's with representation from multiple towns. Would be one way of minimizing the the close and familiar way in which we lived in Vermont, where everybody knows everyone else. So that's one thing that is sort of in the works right now. That would have an effect on the type of civilian review board that the legislature will, may in fact mandate. There are also associations like the National Organization of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, which has probably about 100 different models that have worked across the United States in terms of civilian review. So we'd like to have community members armed with sufficient information to be able to enter into a credible negotiation with the town or with the police department without the knee-jerk reaction being on the part of those in administration. Well, you don't know what you're talking about, or we've already figured out what we want to have happen. The reason that we set this up in this manner was so that, one, the community would be vested with information about promising practices, effective practices. And then we'll keep our eye on what's happening in Montpelier relative to citizens review boards. There's a so how are we going to figure out who's going to be on these research panels? One, we'll have job descriptions up next week. We're not asking for resumes. We're not asking for, 4 or 5 pages of your experience. But there'll be a small group of us that we're going to just do interviews. So a community member who may not, one during COVID, might not have access to a printer or to a copy machine, but that we'll do, we'll interview each and every person that wants to be considered for one of the 2 research teams. That way, no one is disadvantaged by having to submit a resume. Can you talk for a little bit, Mary?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
What I want to talk a little bit is about our approach, because I was hearing a lot of questions earlier around, several questions which are very legitimate ones around how do we think about including full representation from the community. What does it mean for our organization as we come into the town, into the community of Bennington, to think about making sure we have marginalized representation? So I guess what I would say to folks is a little bit in terms of our approach. Curtis and I feel very strongly that it's of utmost importance to have all voices at the table. I have a colleague I work with, and one of the things that she jokes about is, it's not so great to be on the menu. It's better to be at the table. And so we are very, thoughtful, and through a social justice lens, that in terms of how we think about our work and our social justice framework, but also around what I would like to describe as sort of a liberatory lens, which is that, we all do better when we all do better. So what's most important for us is that the voices who have in fact been marginalized, or in many ways in communities in Vermont have been pushed away from the conversation, our work is to make sure they are fully brought to the table and that they're not on the menu. And so we operate from, in our thinking, we think a lot about social identity. We think about issues of privilege and power in the kinds of relationships that we are building with community members, but also, again, the dynamics in the community and how those issues are either being considered or not. And so, I feel strongly that our organization and the work that we do really comes from what I see as a social justice lens, a social justice framework. And for me, that's very different than talking about diversity, right? Diversity is everywhere. Diversity is the natural order, but so yes, we love diversity. We're all about diversity. And what's most important is like, well, the diversity that we honor, that we say we honor, appreciate, are we allowing that diversity to be at the table, be part of the decision making, be in leadership, be part of the political process? And so I hope for some of you that are asking those questions, which are really important questions, that you can be rest assured that that's something that we put forward. And you'll see in the way that Curtis and I work together, except for tonight, he's not in the greatest shape. But typically, we think a lot about our work as me as a cisgendered woman, white, working class, growing up, kind of more middle class. It's like we think about social identity in the way that we work with each other as a team and the other team members that we bring, which allow
Oh,
Mary, you've frozen up.
You're frozen up, Mary. Oh, there you are.
Is that better?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I hate this platform sometimes.
It's because you live in New Hampshire.
I don't know what y'all missed. It could be Consolidated Communications. No offense to them, but it could be that. So I think, again, also just to address the issues around, and I'm really appreciating people have really put, their magnifying glass to the proposal, that there might not have been certain kinds of language that you were hoping to see in it. I mean, I see our approach, and for me, as somebody who is a community organizer and an activist, I can't be part of Vermont Partnership if we're not talking about collaboration. And I think we take that to the next step, which is, our dominant voices always at the front of collaborate. Like we can talk about collaboration, but whose voices are really at the front of the conversation? So we're going to really rely on the community, and we hope that there's a healthy, authentic exchange with members of the community, even if it's challenging and uncomfortable, for you to be giving us feedback along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do want to make the distinction between the IACP report that was dotted with language of professionals, quote unquote, which is really discouraging to residents. That the reason that we are here is to make sure there are strong community voices as we go through the 25 recommendations and their implementation. And our assessment is that the community doesn't have sufficient information upon which to base a negotiation with the town or with the police department. And so we want to fill that void first, ahead of time. The guarantee of safety was another sort of question or issue that came up. It is our hope that you will grant us access to marginalized members of your community so that they could be actively engaged in this process. I'm in Brattleboro. Obviously, I know Kaya and other people in your community. But for those that are truly marginalized or vulnerable, part of our strategy is how do we make the vulnerable feel less vulnerable in this process?
Can I address that issue? I think we're up against a huge challenge in bringing marginalized people into this process. You are dealing with people who may have never voted, people who don't read the newspapers, people who don't know who's on the select committee. I should say that I'm someone who works with these people. I'm a mental health professional, and I've dealt with marginalized people my entire career here in Bennington, worked at UCS, and now I do work with people who are on probation and parole and in and out of jail. And I've heard what people have said about the police. And then when you do get them in, many of these people are intimidated, trying to get them to speak their mind. One of the roles that I've had to take at times is to help people communicate with their public defenders, because they have speech difficulties sometimes, or they don't understand the process that they're going through. People who are barely competent to be standing trial. Bringing these folks into this process is going to be a challenge. I mean, I'm willing to help do that because you know, I can kind of act as an intermediary. They do trust me, the ones that I work with. But yeah, it's going to be very difficult. I mean, you talk about no resumes, and you know, even an interview without having somebody there with them who can help them through the process could be a challenge.
This is Lynn Mazza. I think the elephant in the room here is engaging these so-called marginalized populations is going to be really difficult with the current personnel in the police department. And I think we just need to just keep that on the table.
I totally agree, because there was a community forum actually, Curtis, you were there. It was several years ago for the Pleasant Street neighborhood where I live, which is mostly very people that are economically marginalized, people of color, blah, 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 and people with disabilities. And we had at the UU a community meeting to try and discuss this kind of thing. And it was at that time that Chief Doucette said that the only bias in Bennington was against the police. And several people actually left the community meeting at that time. The Rutland police chief was there as well. And so, but this is the problem that Lynn's describing that we're dealing with here.
Yes, there's no doubt that there's a challenge. But I have a very firm belief that we can cull the information to inform decision making from marginalized communities. And what I'm not hearing from, is it Kirk?
Yes.
Yes. What I didn't hear from you was that it's an impossible task.
No, I don't think it is.
Okay.
But some of us professionals might have to assist in the process.
Okay. If that makes it more effective, then we welcome that help.
Or it might just be providing a safe space like Rad did for the 50-some people that came to actually talk to the IACP, where people that weren't invited didn't come in because they might provide the perception of it not being a safe environment.
Right. And we would rely upon the community to guide us in that manner. Let's see here. In terms of training, so we will start the training with the select board and the some of the senior leadership in the police department and town manager's office. Once they've gone through the first round of training that we provide them, there'll be a point at which they're going to need to make a decision about providing similar training on a much broader scale. And again, this is training around unconscious bias, fragility, resistance to change. And so we'll broaden that to town members.
Yes. Chris, can I add to that? Can I add to that a little bit as well? So, I think I just did a session this afternoon with some folks over in Nashville, and it was so interesting to see the range. It was like with 100 people, and a colleague of mine were doing this on Zoom, and we were talking about definitions and language, and there's such a range of understanding and interpretation, but also lived experience of how we talk about these things. And so I was talking, my colleague is a Black woman, I'm talking about myself as a white woman, grew up in South Boston, grew up in this neighborhood, et cetera. And we all come into this conversation from our own lived racial identity and racial location, whether we're conscious of it, whether we've thought about it. And so, part of what we do in our team really gives some thought to how are we located in these conversations in terms of class, race, gender, disability, ability, whatever that might be. I think is so important, and language is so important. So one of the things I want to say is I have been, my work most recently, or probably in the last year, but I got a lot of pushback about it, but I've been working with it, is really talking about white supremacy culture. Because that's really, if you look at the language of white supremacy culture, we're not talking about white supremacists in terms of the Ku Klux Klan or other organized groups. I'm talking about the culture and the society which involves law enforcement, policing, education, healthcare. We can go down the whole list of institutions, but to really understand how whiteness and white supremacy culture are shaping the ways in which policies and practices are being crafted to benefit a certain group and not benefit or give lack of to other groups. So, that's something that we will be talking about. And I think given the moment that we're in nationally right now, given that the media has decided all of a sudden, like, oh, we're going to talk about white supremacy culture. Sorry, that's my bias. When in fact, some of us have been talking about it for, people have been talking about it for 500 years. It's important to call it what it is and to start to begin to dismantle that and understand that policing, law enforcement, structures that have held social power are part of that white supremacy culture. And so how do we look at that? How do we acknowledge that that's the truth? How do we look at the history of Bennington, right? How do we look at that in terms of the relationship of white Vermonters to Black Vermonters historically? I think that's all part of the conversation. But again, I appreciate what someone said earlier. I think it was Lynn, you talked about the elephant in the room. We have to, if we're gonna move past this moment and really start talking about social justice, we need to start talking about the elephants. And one of them is white supremacy culture. So you may hear me talk about that, and people get, some of the folks I was working with today are uncomfortable with that language, but I think that's what we need to be talking about.
I want to answer a couple of the questions that are in the chat. There's a nuance between vulnerable and marginalized. Vulnerable are individuals who do not have the basic resources to ensure their livelihood, whether it be food, be it education, be it a job. Marginalized are a direct function of the dominant culture, where the dominant culture will marginalize Blacks or gays or lesbians. Not all Blacks, not all gays, or all lesbians are vulnerable. Many of us are employed, we have secure employment, we have education, we have the means to travel or to do it, but we're not vulnerable. Vulnerable relates to folks who, by no fault of their own, cannot sustain themselves. So, and it doesn't put the blame on the individual. It's just a statement of status. And some of that status is driven by white supremacy culture. Some of that is driven by capitalism. Some of that is driven by educational status and attainment. So I want to make sure that when you hear us say vulnerable, that's who we're talking about. When we're talking about the marginalized, that's where the dominant culture begins to dictate what another group of people can or cannot do, or what is desirable or undesirable.
Curtis, I hate to put you on the spot, but I feel like the last question that Liz is asking seems to be one that might be one on other folks' minds around a plan to implement the IACP recommendations. And Liz is asking for some understanding about that, guys. What I'm hearing is she's not really clear what the purpose of this meeting is. Yeah.
Okay. Part of the work that we're going to do with the select board is sort of the detailing of the recommendations, that which can be done sequentially, that which can be done in parallel fashion, and at all points where and how community would be involved. The ICP dropped the report and recommendations, but they didn't have a roadmap. And so our initial work with the select board is providing with the training that would allow for sort of a reimagination of how the plan is, how the recommendations are adopted. So that will be forthcoming. As far as there's another question about the timeline for the research teams. We'll have that out next week. Have job descriptions set up in the process whereby people can apply. Let's see here. Yeah, okay. Let me see if I can find it. There's another question here that I saw that I wanted to ask. Oh, in terms of a communications platform, we're going to set up either through the library or through the town. Hopefully, it will be through the library of a running log of resources that the community should be aware of. It's where the research teams will log into will present information and their thoughts. As we run across additional resources about, we'll put updates, for example, about what's happening in the legislature relative to civilian review boards. And actually, Dick Sears is someone that you should tap into in terms of how the legislation is moving along. The other ball that's up in the air has to do with the training of police officers in the department. The police academy is going through a shakeup. We don't know if it will continue to be freestanding or if it will be folded into the executive branch of government. There currently is not an executive director, so they're in the process of trying to find someone. So like I said, there are multiple balls up in the air that we don't, that will have an impact on things like the Civilian Review Board, training for, additional training for the police force.
Curtis, if I might just, before you go further, relative to your thoughts about the town website or the library, I'll just tell you that the town website is almost impossible to navigate. So if you're going to have the town do a website, I suggest they do a separate one, not their normal one.
Okay. We'll bring it up at the library because that might be a better place. How do people feel about that? In terms of the library being the...
I still think Facebook is the best mechanism if you want to reach a lot of the folks you want to reach.
Okay. Well, I think Facebook is one way of reaching with information, but in terms of having a library that needs to be in one location, it's difficult to scroll through Facebook to find, oh yeah, I read that there was, Obama's 21st Century Police Report. Was that last week or was that last month? So we wanted to catalog all these resources in one location. And it'll be
I agree. Yeah.
Okay.
I like the concept of the central location. The Bennington Free Library is downtown. They have great hours. The only thing that I'm a little hesitant about is the fact that we are in the midst of COVID. So I'm just wondering how that might affect the way that people are able to access those documents.
Yeah, that's the real challenge right now because not everyone has access to the internet. Yeah, I think that's something that we have to take up with the community members. If they have smartphones that have access, so we're looking for a single.
I'm sorry, a lot of people do have the phones now because everyone that was homeless that was put up in a motel, the town was able to get them phones. So that's a good thought, Curtis. I just want.
Okay. Let's see here. And then. Oh, so policy review. Every policy in the police department needs to be reviewed. And so the process for that happening will certainly have community input. Again, part of the ICP report really speaks to a sense of expediency. And that expediency is that the law enforcement department will do the work and then bring it before the community. And the community, without any information or knowledge, says yay or nay, or they just don't show up because they don't have the wherewithal to argue in one direction or another based on best practices or promising practices.
Is this an option for the police department or is this going to be mandated? So if someone chooses not to show up or participate, are there going to be repercussions? Is there suspension? What's the process?
On which side?
For the members of the police department. when the trainings are offered? If
they will be mandated, optional. There's no opting out.
So no one can call in for sick days?
Not with Mary and I in the front of the room.
Thank you.
Now we have done training with some police departments where we've had to ask an officer to leave. So, but in terms of they're expected to be there, and that's what we expect.
Yes, just to add on to that, having done a lot of law enforcement training across sort of sheriff departments and state police, local police, and then also my brother-in-law, I have a brother-in-law who is on the force in Richmond. One of the things that we try to do, and I think we've been pretty successful in terms of trying to keep people in the room and also get people on board with the work, is finding ways to build relationship, talk about our own experiences with law enforcement, talk about that I have a brother-in-law who's in law enforcement. So, but at the end of the day, they may not always be happy with what it is that we're delivering, but I think Curtis and I do a pretty good job for the most part of setting a tone that really tries to support the work that they can be doing in a way that is going to benefit the community. And here's the truth, right? If that's not the case for some of these folks, then they really need to not be there. And that's something else that we talk about, not directly oftentimes with individual patrollers or in a setting, in a teaching session, but letting folks know that this might not be somebody who, if the core values of the department, which we talk about, we try to reshape and really explore, and oftentimes really revise, if the core values are not in accordance and matching how someone is showing up in their work professionalism, in the way they show up in the department, in the culture of the locker room also, so to speak, then that is something that we bring attention to.
The other thing that we do is the reason that we start with the select board, or we spent a couple of years just working with the colonel and the majors at state police before we even began working with the troopers, or the board of directors of a company, or the select board in Burlington or in Rutland. And then the members of the select board show up for the training for the town employees or for those that are in the lower ranks, to talk about their experience and the value that the training is having on changing the culture of the organization, so that folks hear that from the top, as opposed to trying to bring the training in someplace where there's no power. Well, it was a struggle to get that out.
Well, I think also just, part of our work always, as a quick example, sometimes Vermont Partnership will get a call about some kind of harassment case in a school district or in a municipality, in a nonprofit organization. And what we typically end up doing is really asking questions that talk about the organizational culture. So, what we want folks to know is that's really where our eye is. And if you don't have brass at the top, whether it's state police or local police departments, where leadership, and I think I'm preaching to the choir here, it sounds to me, if local law enforcement leadership are not on board, then it's the same like in school districts. If the superintendent and the principal and administrative team are not on board, then the work is not going to take hold. It doesn't hold fundamentally in the value system and in the practice of the organization. So that's something that we will be giving a lot, and we know you all have as well, and experiencing that. That's something that we'll be giving a lot of attention to.
Yeah. In terms of who's going to hire the research teams, it'll be myself and one person from town manager's office. We'll sit down and do the interviews, and then make a decision.
I just want to throw out there that it could be that the town manager's office isn't. Is that like instead of a select board person or a community member or something?
My first thought, one, this is a town position. So we need to have someone from the town on the committee that's doing the reviewing. And so, my choice would be that Dan Monk's be that person. I haven't broached it with him yet. If he's on the call, he now knows. But this is a part-time temporary town position. And so the town has to be part of the decision-making process.
Is there any way that the town could be a select board member? I mean, wouldn't it make more sense for the work group, the select board work group, for them to be involved in that decision-making process as opposed to Dan? To be frank, Dan seems kind of random to me. Or Don, he seems kind of random.
Okay, well, I'll take that into consideration. Let's see, other questions here. Okay.
Curtis, let's take a moment and just see like kind of where folks are at and other, burning questions or reactions to what has been shared tonight. What's missing for you? I'm super aware that, with Curtis's challenges with his voice right now, and also just trying to navigate this platform, I want to be sure that people feel like they're being heard, but if there's other things that are on people's minds, we have some time for that.
Yeah.
Can I speak? My name is Patricia.
Right.
And
absolutely. Thank you.
Hi, I was born and raised in Bennington, so I consider myself to be also a hometown girl and a Benningtonian. And I've had lots of jobs and have also connected with many people on all different levels. Currently working in the emergency department and at a detox center, so 2 jobs, but I am willing to walk the beat, so to speak, and I don't like ending a sentence in the preposition at, but I'm willing to meet people where they're at, meaning I'm willing to go into different community settings, different streets, different locations, and sit and talk with people and let them know that change is coming. Change will happen. There's a lot of people who are dedicated for the better good of Bennington, and that your voices will be heard. And I just really hope that transparency is going to be at the top of our list as values, because it hasn't always been. And there is a fear and there is a stigma. And I think that if we just take a deep breath and, take into consideration that not everybody has the same as we do, and we're going to be dealing with, multiple people across the spectrum, we can get a lot accomplished. And I'm a firm believer that it takes a village. So I just think that everybody needs to be cognizant of that and just remember that we're all coming from different aspects, different walks of life. We you never know what someone has to go through in the morning before they put on their shoes and get to where you are with them. So just we have to remind everybody to be patient and kind.
Wise words.
Thanks, Patricia.
Thank you.
And I appreciate, one of our core tenets of the work that we do from Vermont Partnership is really about relationship building and community-centered, participant-centered. So I don't know if we're conveying that well enough tonight. Curtis usually does a much more kind of charismatic opening and just can't manage that tonight. But, we really, that's at the forefront of our approach. I mean, I think that what we know in our experience working with Burlington, working with Rutland, my experience in working with Stowe and Horseville is it's about relationship building and also understanding that as somebody who identifies as white, who was not born and raised in Vermont, who came from a very different upbringing and a different setting, that my worldview and my perspective is going to be very different. And so how do we allow for those multiple worldviews and perspectives and let people have voice to those and then recognize where power and privilege have allowed for some of those worldviews and some of those ways of being to be in the back, and how do we bring those forward? So thanks, Patricia. I appreciate this idea of relationship building.
No problem. Thank you for listening.
All right. We have 4 minutes. Burning questions, comments.
Things that are missing for folks. Yeah.
I have a question. There's been a really strong conversation nationally recently about defunding police departments. And I've seen it happening in a lot of places, including in the town where I went to college. I grew up in Bennington. And reforms such as like trainings and technology like body cameras has been proven to not work in a lot of situations and hasn't been effective at preventing police violence, specifically towards like people of color. And I was wondering why the discussion right now is kind of like missing the conversation about defunding and whether that's on the table at all.
Well, there are multiple moving targets, and we have no control over all of them. There are people who strongly feel that leadership in town needs to go. There are people who believe that the police should be defunded. There are people who believe that the resources that the police department receives need to be reallocated and focus on making the vulnerable feel less vulnerable. All those things are moving parts. And we recognize that those very different points of view and advocacy are all in play. Our mission is, how do we make the IACP recommendations, their implementation coming from and with participation on equal footing with the town. And that's where we focus our attention. There's some things that, we have no control over. We have no control over the legislature, whether or not they decide to create regional civilian review boards. We can't control, legislation about the police academy. We can't control activist groups in the advancement of their social, and political agendas. But our part is really around the IACP and ensuring that there's a good and solid community process involved. Mary, you want to close us out?
Yeah, sure. I'm just. Are we all gonna get shut out of here at 8:30?
Yes.
I was on a few Zoom calls today, and all of a sudden it was like, you have 59 seconds.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden I have to disappear. That's fine. So again, I think there's obviously a lot more conversation that Curtis and I need to be having with folks who are here tonight and with other folks in the community. I'm having some great chats with folks here in the chat room about ways to connect with people whose voices are who have traditionally and historically been underrepresented, who maybe even felt like they couldn't be here tonight, which I think is really important to name and understand why that might be. So, we're going to give attention to that. And I'm, again, just appreciating that this is a very long journey for Bennington residents. Where I live in Winchester, New Hampshire, we are in the midst of a very beginning conversation, and we have a very similar demographic profile here. And so, these things take time. We like to say it's a marathon, not a race. I know that's not often comforting because people's lives are at stake and a lot of people have been harmed by what's been happening. But we feel optimistic that with the support of you and the willingness to be open and authentic and be uncomfortable at times in our conversations and create opportunities for that we can make some change here, and we can make it. And Curtis and I and Vermont Partnership is very much committed to that. And so I appreciate all of you. Thank you. And I'm happy to put my email in the chat if folks want to be in touch, outside of this meeting, and we can continue the conversation and certainly be giving us some data and some intel as we begin to unfold the project.
Yes, and I'll put mine in as well. And I want to thank everyone for your patience with my affliction, and hopefully the next time we meet, I will be at full force. So be
I
well.
hope you feel better soon. Thank you for doing this.
Okay.
Yeah, well, thanks for being here.
Thanks, everyone. Take good care.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good night.
Peace.